January 17th, 2021. This is all about your Benjamins and your weekly mixtape. I feel like I'm a broken record. I say it a lot throughout the year, but I honestly can't believe we are halfway through the month of January. Time is flying by. Let's get to the headlines that may or may not be impacting your financial plan and portfolio, and we're going to start in D.C. We know we have a big week in D.C. coming up, but last week was a pretty big week as well. Headlines I'm sure you heard about, but let's see how they may or may not be impacting you and your plan and your investments. We'll start kind of middle of the week with President Trump being impeached by the House, which sends the vote to the Senate later this month. The vote will actually happen after the inauguration. Understand why they go through with the full process. There's the potential to be able to ban President Trump from running again for president, which is something that he's talked about doing. So we'll see how all of that plays out. But the markets didn't have a huge reaction. It was to be expected. And honestly, it doesn't change much of what's going on because it's just the vote in the House, which sends it to the Senate, which happens later on. So it's a little bit of, I don't want to say it's an act, but it's really not changing much of what's going to be happening over this coming week and the last week as well. The reason we got to the impeachment was because Vice President Pence decided not to invoke the 25th Amendment. If you're not familiar with that, that amendment allows the Vice President and Cabinet to take the power, basically strip power away from the President because they do not feel that he or she is fit to do the job. Pence decided not to do that, and one of the reasons he cited that's in the article that I actually agree with at the moment, like in the moment when that was being asked for him to invoke that 25th Amendment, he said with tensions where they are and emotions where they are, doing that would just incite what was already going on. And I actually do believe that. Now, is that the real reason, or is that just a cited reason, but there was more motivation just to not turn over the power and quote-unquote let the Democrats win, because you know that politics now has come down to us versus them. But I would like to think that there was a little bit of thought about how would this pour gasoline on a fire that's already fuming or already very high. So I do think that that may have been the right call, because I think that the rioting and the emotions that were already very high probably would have been elevated, and it would have gotten a lot worse. And if we look at from that moment now, we have the luxury of hindsight. Hindsight's always 20/20. But if we look at from that moment till now, things have calmed down, emotions have calmed down. There are still people that feel the way they felt the day of the storming of the Capitol, but nothing has happened since then. And had we gone forward with removing the power, I can only imagine what would have happened from the Trump camp and his supporters, and I think it would have got a lot uglier. So I think that may have been the right call, knowing now what we know. But in that moment, I think I would have been afraid to just make the emotions even worse. So I think that may have been the right call. But that's how we got to the impeachment. So we'll see how this whole process pays out. Obviously, it's probably not going to have any impact on what we care about most, and that's our financial plan and what we're trying to work for our goals. Because, one, it'll be a blip on the radar. The history books will remember it, but it won't really impact what our goals are 5, 10, 15, 20 years beyond. And also, it's going to be on somebody who's no longer in the White House impacting any policy going on. So that was one of the bigger headlines. It's not something you see very often. The first time a president has been impeached twice. But again, it's on the way out, so it doesn't really change too much. Now let's get to the economic stuff. We always talk a little bit about economics. We don't dive too deep into it, but just to kind of see where things are going and what's going on. A trend we've always talked about, unemployment. We know it's high and it's ticking back up, which I don't think by now you are surprised. Now, by no means am I a leading economist, but I just think that going back to the summer and anticipating a tick up in COVID cases and going back to having businesses shut down and restaurants capped and schools going out, it was only expected, I think, and obvious that unemployment would tick back up. So that's where we're at. Numbers are getting closer to 1 million on the unemployment. I think it was 986,000, up 185,000 over the last week. But that is that number where we're at. The markets, the economy have kind of handled that. If you're in that camp where you are unemployed, you aren't feeling that. But the rest of the country has kind of moved on past it, which is honestly something that I find a little sad. It's troubling. I've talked about the wealth gap and the widening that it goes. I mentioned the education gap last week. It's troubling to see that, and I don't know what the fix is. I do think continuing to talk about it is a good thing, because ultimately talking about it can lead to more conversations, which maybe ends up leading to you or I helping somebody out there that we come across that needs it, or maybe even some solutions in the future that actually impact it. But unemployment continues to tick up, and I would imagine that continues to go, which will trickle into consumer confidence. So in January, consumer confidence ticked down just a little, not a lot, which actually I think is pretty impressive that it stayed as high as it did, because you think about what happened in January. We've got an impeachment, we've got the Capitol riot, we've got unemployment rising. Even though it's a start to the new year, not much really changed. When the ball dropped, that wasn't a magical cure for COVID and life going back to normal. We actually see a new strain of COVID. So all of these things, yet consumers are still feeling pretty good, even though it ticked down some. I do think that part of that probably is relief from a little bit of stimulus with the expectation of more coming. So knowing there's some help, and then hopefully some more help that comes to small businesses out there, because those are the ones that are really struggling the most. So we'll see how consumers feel going forward. All right, going to bring back a topic from last week. I mentioned that there was going to potentially be some stocks of Chinese companies that were going to be banned on the stock exchange. And as of this past week, that is not going to happen after all. There are 9 companies that have been added to a list, but the big ones, Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, are still going to be able to be traded for now by American investors. So figured I'd give you an update on that. Not that we're probably diving into those stocks or trying to take advantage of dips because of the news, but I brought it up last week, so I thought I would revisit it again. And the final one is a little bit of a positive one. And for those of you here in Fishers or Indianapolis, it's a local story. So Eli Lilly has an Alzheimer's drug that helped patients in a small trial, which is pretty exciting. We have all this talk about the COVID vaccination, and that's rolling out, but it's still cool to see some progress made in other areas. And if you know anybody who has dealt or had family members dealt with Alzheimer's, you know it's nasty. So it's nice to see that we're making headway towards that. Hopefully Lilly continues to have good luck with this and it moves forward. So that's it. I know it was a big week from a standpoint of historical news with impeachment and everything that went on there, but otherwise not a lot of excitement. Markets hanging in there, doing their thing. Bitcoin continuing to be as volatile as it ever is. So again, thinking of those areas, know your risk tolerance, know your plan before you dive into that stuff, and definitely don't let FOMO bring you into something that you really don't need for your goals. All right, so that is it for this week. I appreciate you for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the blog. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. We've got some new videos coming out. I've actually begun working with somebody to edit my videos, so the videos are going to look better than ever. Not these mixtapes. These will always just be me because it's Sunday morning as I record it, edit, and get it out for the blog post. But the production level is going to go up, which hopefully will help make listening and watching better going forward. So subscribe there. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you for listening. There's going to be a new show coming out every Friday called The Pursuit. So it'll be a show on the All About Your Benjamins podcast where it'll be mostly me, but sometimes a guest, just talking about various things in life with mindfulness and self-awareness and finding your goals and what you're going after and pursuing your passions and how all of that ties into your finances to hopefully lead you to the life that you want to live. I'm really excited about the show. It's something that I'm very excited about, passionate about. If you go over to the RLS Wealth website, you'll see a lot of that language there. So it's kind of like over the last 5 years, I've found where I really want to go with helping people align their money and their values and how to talk about it. So really excited about that show. Friday's episode will have a guest, a special guest I'm excited, which I'll announce later this week. So be sure to subscribe to everything, staying up to date with what's going on, and I'll quit rambling now. Have a great week, and we'll see you all in the next episode.